Hello and welcome to the Digital Digest, your weekly breakfast of insights, tips and tricks and general information that will help anyone trying to move things forward in this digital world of accounting. This show is sponsored by iPlicit, the mid-market accounting solution designed for businesses that outgrow the smaller finance tools. It's also brought to you both by the Digital Disruptors and SB Digital, which are pushing the boundaries in this digital accountancy space. I'm your host, Ryan Piercy, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by John Toon, who is everywhere at the moment after being in about 1,000 talks at Accountex. And we're going to dive into specifically the not-for-profit sector and products and apps that can help digitize, streamline, and make those, organizations much more efficient and effective. So I guess before we, dive into what those solutions are, John, can we talk about what do we mean by not-for-profit? What kind of organizations form this group?
Cheers, Ryan. I guess for me, there's probably sort of four key categories. I know it's not absolutely defined by that, and there are other potential types of organisation you can put in here. But for me, charities are the key one, probably the most obvious one, and then a sort of a subset of those are academy, schools, housing associations, and then sort of clubs of some description, whether that's a sports club or a members sort of social type club. And those are the four key ones. And as I'm sure we'll move on to, they all have their own sort of specific needs and requirements.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge sector, right? There's no way we're going to be able to delve into the entire not-for-profit sector in 20 minutes. So we'll do what we can and we'll try and be quite generic in our discussion. But yeah, you mentioned it. There are challenges. There are some big ones. One of them, I guess, is that they have very specific reporting, don't they? They have very specific needs. They need to slice data in different ways. We've both worked with not-for-profit businesses in the past. Like, what are, I guess, some of the typical challenges that when you're talking to those organisations that you come up against?
I think, firstly, what we tend to see with a lot of organisations is that they tend to be on systems which tend to be quite old, or sort of what we would describe, I guess, as legacy, and then lack automation opportunities or lack integration opportunities, and so that results in fairly manual processes. I guess the other thing which you kind of mentioned there is that they all have quite bespoke reporting requirements. So within the main sort of charity requirements, you've got things like fund accounting, obviously general restricted funds, etc. Plus other specific things around legacies as well. And then as you get sort of more specific within, say, like the housing association or academy sector as well, they then have their own specific frameworks around reporting, and not just statutory reporting, but also compliance and regulatory reporting that goes hand in hand with that. And they've got to accommodate their accounting systems. Ideally, have got to accommodate as much of that as possible to make that as smooth as possible.
Yeah, and because they are quite niche, I guess, in every single area of not-for-profit, they can be quite underserved, I guess. Some of the more generic systems, they don't necessarily have specific not-for-profit reporting requirements or reports built in. And so I think some of those organisations feel they're forced into probably some archaic processes, archaic systems. And you actually can do a lot more. You just have to be a bit creative with it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. A big thing that I always encounter is because of these reporting requirements, because they need to be very clear on where money is going and allocation of that money, there are very stringent approval processes in any of these organisations. And that means that there is paperwork generally flying everywhere, like between people moving around, and it can be horribly painful for finance teams in organisations as they grow in the not-for-profit side. So anything we can do to help resolve that is a big time saver in that space.
I'd absolutely agree, and I think as you kind of alluded to there, is that because of the bespoke requirements, there are systems, typically older systems, that do serve some of those bespoke requirements. But again, some of the newer systems that are available as well do accommodate that without too much tailoring or tweaking. But it's the old adage of people just don't know what they don't know. And I see that this sector in particular doesn't tend to spend a huge amount of time, looking at what's out there in the market, even though, particularly through things like COVID, for example, they've had to increasingly move to being able to, receive money, say, online or via, some sort of credit card payment, whether that's maybe Stripe or PayPal, for example. But again, those systems tend to be operated sort of in isolation outside of the other financial and operational systems and things. And, we were discussing before, weren't we, in terms of, one of the key challenges is for these organizations receive money in lots of different ways and forms. So it can come in cash, it can come in grants, it can come, direct from actual sort of service, if you like, that's been delivered to customers. It can come in via cards, credit cards, direct debits. If you think of a way of getting money to someone, it's pretty much guaranteed that an organisation in this sector is receiving money in that kind of way, and then the accounting requirements and everything else around that can be complex as well.
Yeah, and because of that, the regulation around it is more challenging, right? So, you've got audit requirements for limited companies, which are expected to go upwards, but the audit requirements for a charity are far lower. So you can need an audit or assurance report at a far lower income base. And from my days in audit, trying to audit income for charities, not profits, was just horrific because, as you say, it comes from all these different places. You're trying to look for understatement. So anything we can do to make it easier for the audit means your audit fees will be lower as well. So that's something that is a key focus in anything we're looking at here. Something also to mention that I don't think we've really touched on previously, John, is VAT reporting, right? Like generally, most not-for-profit have partial exemption calculation requirements, and most finance systems, especially in the small end, can't do that automatically. So you need to be a little creative in how you can do that and how you can automate that. Some of the very niche systems out there, I know that, like, for example, I've come across some golf clubs that have a very niche system that does partial exemption VAT reporting. That can be great. But if you want to benefit from a lot of the automation, you have to be a little bit creative on the reporting. But before we go into some of the solutions, because I know we've got some great answers, some great help here, is to talk about what are some of the challenges that actually prevent these organizations moving, changing their systems. And there can be a few here. So, John, why don't you kick us off on what you've experienced?
Yeah, I think one of the main challenges is actually, going back to that point I made about people just don't know what's available out there. So actually, you're almost starting from zero in terms of your, and that's not a reference to the accounting product. You've got to kind of educate, sometimes these organisations about what is available, and you can be talking to an organisation that may have incredibly manual processes and almost be literally working from paper to being on a fairly complex bespoke system, which may be entirely suitable for them, but they might not be utilising some of the automation features or the integration opportunities that are available for them. So I think that's one of probably the key ones. I think the other one that we tend to see as a result of that is that charities or not-for-profit organisations tend to be fairly entrenched in their systems and into a way of operating. And as you say, they have concerns about disrupting things like those approval processes, which are really critical to them, and how they make sure they keep on top of money and reporting requirements around, say, grants and things like that. So that's really, really critical to understand and make sure that that's being accommodated. And then I think my final other point on that is that again, probably down towards the smaller end, is that you can find that some of these organisations have been run almost entirely by volunteers, and so you've got a challenge around just availability of them, particularly if they're working in a full or part-time job as well, because then you're not going to be able to turn up at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning and deliver some training or help them move to a system, because they may not be available, and you might have to accommodate doing that maybe in the evenings or when they have free time. And so just that organizational challenge, if you like, between us and them is a factor that needs to be considered sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Money is tight is not the right word. Money needs to be used more effectively in not-for-profits than in profitable businesses. They're looking at it and going, okay, we've received this money. We need to use this in the most charitable way possible, or for what our causes are. Can we really utilise this to try and streamline? Well, the biggest, I guess, thing to weigh up here, and as I've come across in many discussions, is, are they paying someone to do this work? If they're paying for it, well, then actually you're bleeding money if you're doing it inefficiently. Now, because there's volunteers in place, the first thing really you should be questioning anyone is who are the people that are doing the processing? Are they people that are being paid? Are they people that are doing this, for free? If the people that are doing it for free, then actually it's unlikely they're going to go and change anything because there's an investment involved in it, and they're never going to recover on that because there's no efficiency savings from a financial point of view. So that is a critical thing to consider if you are, running a not-for-profit, or if you're trying to help businesses that are doing it. But yeah, the other part, I guess, as we've touched on, that organizational structure, you've got like a committee. So trying to get anything through that committee can take 3, 4, 5 times as long as you would just going to a single decision maker. And you have to be aware of that. Don't be like worried if you've had a conversation, it's gone quiet. I've had those and it's then taken 2 years and they've come back and gone, we need to make a change now. But the main thing is that the other thing to highlight is generally not-for-profits are very acute on risk registers and assessing risk. If you can highlight, well, if you've got some critical people in place and it's fully reliant on old systems that are outdated, you've got high risk there. You need to focus on moving that down to lower risk, adopting cloud-based technology where if you need to, you can outsource much more easily than bringing someone in, is, a huge help in, assessing from a risk register point of view. So just some, considerations, some impacts, anything that we've probably come across when anyone is dealing with the not-profit sector. So look, we've talked about the problems, we've talked about the challenges of trying to help these organisations streamline. Let's talk about some of the solutions, John. Now, we're, I guess, very focused with what we do and cloud native systems. I think that's probably what our discussion is going to be on here. And a main thing that I think benefits those in not-for-profit because of that varied range of income requirements, VAT reporting, approval processes, etc., is having an ecosystem because you can keep the costs down. So generally, I guess my go-to for this would be a Xero or QuickBooks Online. Is that a similar thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we would always try and make a product like that work for the reporting requirements that the organisation had, and then if that was then no longer the case, we would then look at something else, like iPlicit, for example.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on size, right? And because these come at different costs. So iPlicit is a great dedicated tool. I think like we talked about this on the podcast recently. They've released something for housing associations. We know they've done something for charity in the past. You've got others in the space such as Accounts IQ that do a lot in the academy sector as well. And I believe iPlicit have also been focused on the academy sector, recently winning some awards for that. So you've got in that mid-tier space, you've got some dedicated solutions that work really well. In the lower end, you need to be a bit more creative. So when you're getting down to likes of Xero and QuickBooks Online, they're out of the box reporting. You look at it and go, well, it doesn't have fund management. It doesn't have activity reporting. So you kind of have to utilize what's in there, such as the tracking categories, the cost centers, etc., to utilize that. But really, you've got the flexibility in these tools to do it. And as soon as you can demonstrate that to a business, you find that, well, they don't need something, that's dedicated for the not-for-profit sector. The tools are there. It's just looking at it in a different way. And I assume that's what you have those, you have the similar discussions.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, it is reasonably easy to, tailor Xero reporting, for example, and get that kind of fund accounting. And particularly now with the new reports that are in Xero, there's a lot more flexibility in there in terms of how you build that. So, where in the past maybe charities had concerns around, you effectively were restricted to, reporting in a way that was just structured around a fairly standard P&L and balance sheet. You can now chop and change that a lot more. As you say, you've got much more flexibility with the likes of tracking categories in there. I think the other side of it as well is that you can switch between cash and accruals reporting in these products, and again, quite often I see organisations in the not-for-profit sector utilising both to report, because they really want to keep on track of what their cash flows look like, and using those cash reports can be very helpful for that. But then obviously, understanding what that means in terms of their statutory reporting requirements and switching back to accrual reporting, gives them some really valid context. I guess that within that as well, because you can then add into the app stack in terms of adding tools like Dext or Auto Entry, for example, along with Approval Max, which I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about for the approval side. That then adds levels of automation that quite often those organisations will not have experienced before. So when you go back to that kind of conversation around risk, but also value for money and impact, you can start to sort of demonstrate that, look, you can build up a reasonably good quality system for probably 50-60 pound a month, if you like, to sort of investment, and get something that will be significantly better probably than what they had before in terms of levels of automation, reporting, and management.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as you touch on, like that, the ability to capture receipts is critical, because generally you've got volunteers or quick change employees in the not-for-profit sector, and they're capturing information spread out across the organisation, and trying to get that into a central place can be quite challenging. If you've got the ability to just have an app on their phone, they take a picture of it, they don't need to worry about it anymore. That is the power of the tools like Dext and AutoEntry. And as soon as you've done that, having a structured approval process that can be based on like a fund or an activity or a value that has an audit trail directly built into it, such as Approval Max, is pivotal. I don't think I've worked with a single not-for-profit that I have not brought Approval Max in that isn't on those kind of upper end tools such as iPlicit and Accounts IQ. That is a fundamental part of working in this sector. So if you're not working with Approval Max and you do work with not-for-profits, I think that's the first place you should go and have a conversation. They do great work in this, and it's the flexibility, right? You can do so much with it. I've never come across a scenario where I'm like, I can't replicate that in Approval Max. Generally, I can replicate it and make it. The main thing we do, we look at it and we have discussions with the organisation and go, you've created something that seems way too complex. Can we simplify it as long as you're hitting the requirements, and then build it into the tool? And they've had to do that because of the manual processes they've got. So let's talk a little bit about income, because there's lots of different income streams, as you said. You've got cash, which is now probably, or cash donations, which is probably changed now to a digital card-based donation system. And you've got really good tools out there to help. If you've not used them before, the likes of Square, the likes of Zettle have these kind of tap and go for donations. You've got some great CRMs out there as well that work well in the not-for-profit sector, that also automatically calculate gift aid, and they integrate directly into the likes of Xero. So instead of having to collect all of this financial information separately in Excel sheets and try and move that into your finance system, which probably, let's be realistic, is not MTD compliant for these organizations. You can use integrated tools and streamline the whole thing. So if you've got the purchasing expenses side fully automated with the likes of Dext and Approval Max, and then you've got the income side integrated and 70-80% automated, you are streamlining your finance team, meaning you don't need to rely on volunteers as much.
Yeah, and I would say, on the CRM side, we're a big fan of Beacon. They're win awards left, right, and centre, and like you say, in terms of being able to capture and collect money from other sources and have that integrated. That for me is a really fundamental thing. And we've had it before with charity of a client of ours, where, for example, they had a Shopify website and POS system set up, but not connected to anything, and it was really manual for them. And we were able to assist with that, and then they just removed days of work every month in terms of just taking sales from that system into their pre-existing account system that they had at the time, and like you say, the MTD requirements and everything else that go with it. I think the one thing I would say is, and you touched on it, is on the VAT side, is you've got to be very, very careful with not-for-profits around making sure that you structure VAT codes and accounts and stuff in the system that you're going to use in a way that lends itself to the complexities of reporting. And I do think that most out-of-the-box account systems don't accommodate particularly well for the complexities of VAT, even for-profit businesses, let alone not-for-profit businesses, in terms of you can have income that's outside of the scope, but it's not no VAT, so it should go on the return, but there's not really a code for that unless you use zero rated, but it's not really zero rated income. And again, going back to that point about partial exemption, is that if you're partially exempt and you're using zero rated VAT for something that's outside the scope, you're going to be completely screwing up the partial exemption calculations and getting them way out of kilter with what they should be. So that does take a little bit of thought and getting right. It's I think for me, as you said, Approval Max is an absolute must. And again, in my experience, not for profits absolutely blooming love it as well, in terms of, you know, the impact it has, typically moving them away from chasing stuff through their emails, or even, you know, moving pieces of paper around. I think the only thing I'd add to the app stack would be probably a product like Fathom, if there was a need to do slightly more complex reporting, or maybe just to assist in terms of interpreting the numbers. You know, Fathom's an incredibly visual tool in terms of what it produces. You know, and I'm a big fan of that. And, you know, there are other reporting apps that do similar things, and again, allows you to take the tracking categories and that kind of data out of the system in a structured way to put in front of you know, trustee boards, for example. And I'm always a big fan of turning numbers into something visual, so that it allows you to interpret the data in a slightly different way.
Yeah, definitely. And this sector is more important than any other for graphical reporting. I know I work in a multi-academy trust, and we get presented with management accounts every month. And I know I'm the only person that understands them, because they're in a standard format for, you know, someone that works in finance, and everyone else just goes, yeah. And then at the end of the year, I kind of explained it to them on how we've made or lost money. But that we're working specifically on the graphical reporting pack now, so that they can see, you know, green is good, red is bad. Come on, let's simplify this as much as we can against our KPIs. One other point I just want to make that everyone should be aware of is that lots of not-for-profits use very unique banks, and those banks don't necessarily have bank feeds. So that is something to check straight away when you start having these conversations. What bank are you on? Do you need to consider changing a bank? And there's been multiple times where I've said, don't even look at changing your finance system until you've had that discussion about changing your bank, because you're not going to benefit from all the automation. All right. We've probably already gone over time, as we always do, John, but simple bit for me is generally my go-to app stack for not-for-profits will be the likes of Xero, QuickBooks Online. We have Dex and Approval Max for the bottom end. Income's very much dependent, but I love, as you said, Beacon. And then I've Fathom integrated as well. Do you have anything different aligned on this?
No, not really, to be honest. I mean, maybe something different on the reporting side sometimes, just depending on what the client wants. But yeah, very, very typical. I guess sometimes you might be chucking something like GECON or something that allows you to take data out into spreadsheets, particularly if you've got to do a bit of manipulation for things like those partial exemption calculations that might be required. So that's probably one other thing that I would chuck into the mix. But yeah, other than that, no, pretty similar, I think.
Yeah, and one final shout out for the XFE team, Xero for Education team, that Sam King, part of the Systems Advisory Network and a definite digital disruptor, has built as part of, I guess, with his team, that specifically for academies, and is transitioning them into the Xero ecosystem and getting the most out of that. If you are an academy trust, definitely worth speaking to them. We did that when we were looking at changing our systems as part of the academy trust I'm a trustee of. All right, I think that's a perfect place to wrap this week's Shark, because we've dived into a lot of information here. So hopefully this episode provided anyone that is listening with valuable insights they can take forward. Please do check out the show notes, the links to Digital Disruptors, SP Digital, and our wonderful sponsor, iPlicit, who are in this not-for-profit space. So if you are a relative size not-for-profit business, please do check out iPlicit. Plus anything and anyone else that we've referenced in the show. If you do want to ensure you catch future episodes, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure you look out for the release on a Thursday morning. We look forward to speaking to you next week.